What would you do if the woman you trusted most, the one who shared your bed, your home, your children, was secretly laughing with another man? This is not just a story of betrayal. It is the journey of a husband who chose silence as his weapon and turned his wife's lies against her. Tonight on Cheating Stories 7, we bring you a chilling tale of deceit, quiet revenge, and the power of walking away. Don't forget to like, subscribe, and share your thoughts in the comments, because this story will leave you questioning. What would you do in his place? Now let's dive into I ghosted my cheating wife and made her lies collapse. I used to know our house by sound. The dryer thumped a lopsided rhythm. The fridge hummed its low vow. Our old dog tapped a patient Morse code across the hardwood each night. Then a new frequency arrived. It was my wife's half-caught laugh, a bright little leak through a closed door, and the faint twin glow of a screen kept face down as if the light itself were guilty. Rebecca said it was work chat, training threads, harmless memes that landed late because her team spanned time zones. She said all of this while moving the phone the way a card sharp moves a coin. Easy, practiced, always where my eyes were not. She angled her body to read, smiled a second before she scrolled, and turned the device over when I entered the room like a host saving a surprise for later. Small dissonances gathered. Lipstick for a mid-morning Zoom, though it was voice only. Perfume I could not name after a day she swore she ate at her desk. A receipt tucked under a cutting board from a cafe across town, even though she had packed leftovers. None of it proved anything. All of it argued something. I inventoried my own faults first, because that is the reflex of a decent man. I work late when the budget closes. I am not a fireworks person in bed. I am a pilot light. Money once slipped through my fingers before I learned the cruel math of debt. Each confession felt like loosening a knot until I noticed the line looped back around my neck. Guilt is a leash if you let someone else hold it, so I set the leash down. I decided not to argue with feelings that could be rehearsed for me. Instead, I would ask the only witness that does not change its story: time. I photographed the odometer before she left for lunch. I checked the gas gauge after she came home early, cheeks bright with a color I had not put there. I learned the usual traffic from our driveway to her office, the minutes the stoplights usually steal, the simplest route to a place I could not yet name. I studied her calendar the way I used to study novels, circling patterns instead of metaphors. There were blocks labeled review and client call that floated like islands, no names attached, always landing on the same days the midnight laughter visited our walls. Her notifications pulsed, then stopped, like a heart speeding up for a sprint no one had announced. The house watched with me. The printer exhaled a single page at 2 a.m., then went still. A ring mark appeared on her nightstand where she had spun her band until it warmed the wood, then taken it off for sleep she suddenly needed on the far edge of the bed. The dog, who could sleep through fireworks, woke at the back door and barked once, confused by footsteps that returned at a time we did not keep. One night the map drew itself. An old cloud backup I had set years ago had been quietly catching mirrored fragments whenever the home Wi-Fi whispered its name. I found it by accident while hunting for a tax form. I stared at the folder like it might bite. There are kinds of honesty that look like betrayal if you reach for them. I stood at the sink for a long minute, tasting metal, and asked the air whether trust means refusing to look or refusing to lie about what you see. I chose to look, not because I wanted to be right, but because I needed to stop being wrong in the same way every night. A single thread opened into a scroll of hours, messages from a contact saved as a single initial. Photos cropped to avoid baby toys and rings, jokes about my dishwasher habits, a private nickname for the passenger seat of her car. I did not read all of it. I read enough to know what else I would need. Screenshots replaced suspicions. I made a folder and named it something dull. I dated each image and wrote down what the house had told me that day: the thump of the dryer, the hum of the fridge, the place the dog paused by the door. Patterns prefer simple language, so do judges. I was not there yet, but I understood the road. In the mirror, I practiced questions that could be answered by clocks. Where were you between 11:52 and 1:15 when the mileage added 5.5? Who was the coworker who laughed at noon when your camera stayed off? Why does the soup in your photo reflect sunlight that reached our kitchen at 10:41 yesterday? They were small questions with heavy futures. By the end of the week, certainty had the shape of a bruise. It did not shout. It did not ask for permission. It spread in quiet increments under ordinary light until even the mirror could not deny the color. I set my phone face down beside hers on the counter, let both screens glow, and listened to the house breathe. The dog settled. The fridge kept its vow. And somewhere behind a closed door, a laugh tried to be small and could not. The house had grown quiet again, too quiet, except for the printer. It coughed once, swallowed, and then pushed out one more sheet. Warm edges brushed my fingertips, a pulse of plastic and heat. 37 double-sided pages emerged, heavy not because of paper, but because of what they carried. Rebecca and Jason reduced to ink. The first lines looked ordinary. How was your day? Did you eat lunch? But appetite seeped quickly between the sentences. By page 4, the words bent toward hunger. By page 6, her tone tilted toward promise. She told him she couldn't wait for our room. A phrase that reappeared in disguise, sometimes the front seat of her car, sometimes a cheap motel near the interstate, sometimes even the hallway outside our children's bedrooms while I read them bedtime stories. Each line was a paper cut, small but accumulating, until my hands trembled as I held the stack. I stacked the pages neatly on the kitchen table and waited. When Rebecca came home, she saw them before she saw me. She froze, keys dangling from her fingers, and asked the question no innocent person asks. How much did you read? The script unfolded exactly as I expected. Tears welled. Her voice cracked. She claimed it was fantasy, just words, just role play. Emotional CPR after she said I had let the marriage suffocate. She reached for my hand as if comfort could braid itself into explanation. I did not pull away, but I did not soothe. I asked narrow questions. Where? When? Who covered for you? Her answers floated like fog, touching everything, settling nowhere. She insisted the messages were exaggerated stories, not acts. When I pressed harder, she deflected. Why did I snoop? Why did I not trust? Why did I not consider how lonely she had been? Then came the escape hatch. If you need clarity, text Jason, she said. He'll tell you it was only words. She slid her phone across the table like proof, but the conversation she showed ended 5 messages early, and I noticed the hesitation in her thumb when she scrolled. Later that night, while she showered, I found the real rehearsal, a parallel chat with a friend, Rebecca asking them to say it was just a game if I asked. The chorus was already preparing, if enough voices sang loudly enough. Maybe the solo didn't matter. I realized then, confrontation wasn't about winning. In her version of the story, there would always be another twist, another excuse, another audience willing to clap. I needed a place with rules, a room where costumes and performances would not be allowed. So I said the word she wanted least, counseling, not as surrender, but as containment. She agreed too quickly, as though the lines were rehearsed in advance. That afternoon, she scheduled a lunch to clear her head. While she drove off, I walked to the garage. I photographed the odometer. I wrote down the gas gauge because paper is clean. Paper carries further than arguments. And if truth was to be told, paper would deliver it more faithfully than her tears ever could. After the tears came the turn. Rebecca's first tactic was not to argue with the facts, but to argue with me. She wore contrition like a winter coat, long enough to make me believe in warmth, then shed it once she found a way to redirect the chill. She began with my body. You never want me, she whispered, her eyes red but sharp. She cataloged the months when my touch had been slow, the nights I rolled away exhausted. Then came the finances. She unrolled the past like a scroll, reminding me of years when my poor spending forced her to borrow from her father. Finally, she summoned the ghost of therapy, the office we had abandoned months before. You never open up, she said. You make me do all the feeling for both of us. The portrait was convincing. For a moment, I almost saw myself through her eyes, stingy, passionless, sealed shut. She reframed her cheating as an emergency exit from a burning house I had built with silence. If I had cared more, she suggested, there would have been no smoke. I inventoried my flaws like a man counting coins. Yes, I am quieter than she likes. Yes, my libido has never matched hers. Yes, I once sank money into things we didn't need. None of these looked like betrayal. Yet, lined up beside her tears, they began to feel like accomplices. I could almost believe her affair had been drafted by my neglect. That was the opening she wanted. She leaned forward, voice suddenly soft, coaxing. What if we admit we both slipped? You with your porn, me with words. We've both been unfaithful in different ways. Let's stop punishing each other. The equivalence was poison wrapped in velvet. Pornography viewed alone is not the same as crossing the border of a marriage bed with another man. One is private hunger. The other is public desecration. I told her so. She recoiled as if struck. Puritan, she hissed. Cruel. That was when I recognized the pattern. Each time I pinned down a detail, the cropped photo that cut out her ring, the saved contact marked only by a single initial, the lunchtime she swore she ate at her desk while a time-stamped meme placed her in a bar. She inflated a grievance until I was the one apologizing for holding the pin. The facts didn't vanish. They drowned beneath the noise. Gaslighting isn't erasure. It's exhaustion. It's not about convincing you the sky is green. It's about making you so tired that you stop looking up. That night, I stopped debating volume. I refused to trade my voice for hers. When she raised the past, I returned to the present, dates, distances, data, odometer readings, receipts. The silence of our dog at midnight until he barked at footsteps that did not belong. She called me cold. I called myself steady. The difference mattered. By the time she fell asleep, tear tracks drying into the pillow, I sat in the dark and wrote 3 lines on a notepad. Facts don't argue. Facts don't apologize. Facts don't forget. The next morning, when she tried again to braid comfort with blame, I asked one question: why the training call that ended at midnight came with a photo showing daylight. She froze, caught between inventing and retreating, and finally said, "You're impossible to live with." Maybe she was right, but impossibility was stronger than gullibility. It would keep me from drowning in her smoke. Gaslighting had its limits. Lies to survive needed scaffolding, and scaffolding required a crowd. I learned that the afternoon a screenshot slipped into Rebecca's camera roll, auto-saved from a notification preview she forgot to mute. It was a group chat blooming across my screen like stage directions. One friend typed, "If he asks, we had lunch at Nora's. Grilled cheese special." Another suggested, "Call it a creative writing exercise. You were workshopping racy dialogue." A third chimed in with commentary about my supposed obsession with dishwashers, as if noticing how plates are stacked was a psychological disorder. It was a production, and I had stumbled into the rehearsal. Once you know a play is underway, props glow. A public photo showed Rebecca's reflection in a cafe window. Outside, blurred but clear enough, stood a man in a company jacket I recognized from Jason's profile picture. Later that week, a loyalty email arrived, congratulating someone with a masked version of her name for a third stay at a budget motel near the interstate. She called it a conference, but conferences don't come with check-in mints and folded towels. I stopped asking her to narrate. Instead, I let objects answer. Her calendar revealed a floating island called Project Review that overlapped perfectly with a cluster of miles on the car's trip history. A geotagged photo, posted as if live at noon, carried metadata stamped at 10:41 a.m. She didn't lie randomly. She pre-built alibis, scaffolding she could climb when the ground shifted. Confrontation would only give her better lighting. Precision would give me gravity. Judges don't care about operatic betrayal. They care about patterns that prove secrecy, risk, and disregard. So I charted the pattern. I hung a map in my head and pinned it with receipts, timestamps, and the silver thread of location pings. I shared the quiet with Mark, the one friend who knew how to sit with silence without trying to fill it. We met in the back booth of a diner where the coffee was tragic, but the walls didn't listen. He listened anyway. Document. Don't perform, he said. Then he slid me the card for Attorney Carter, a man who had seen more ruined kitchens than any contractor. Carter didn't flinch when I placed the folder on his desk. He flipped through the pages the way a medic examines a wound, unromantic, exact. Custody courts want stability, he said. Don't move out, don't explode, keep records. You're not proving you were wronged, you're proving you're reliable. I left his office lighter, not because the pain was gone, but because anger had been replaced by a list. At home, I began scrubbing the stage. Anything that could be repurposed into a story about my temper vanished. Firearms to a friend's safe, serial numbers photographed, tools locked away. I vacuumed the living room and stored the latter in the garage, then took photos of both. It felt absurd until I imagined a future in which absurdity might be evidence. Meanwhile, the network rehearsed. Rebecca sent a selfie from a fluorescent hallway with the caption, "Long day." One friend replied, "Remember, we were together from noon to 1. Another added, "And those texts were fiction for my class, wink." Rebecca hearted both lies as if favoriting a song. I saved the image and its timestamp, compared it to the car's extra 4 miles, cross-checked it with the doorbell camera footage a neighbor lent me after I fixed his printer. At 12:31, my wife was at Jason's door holding 2 paper cups of tea. For a moment, I considered confronting her with the cups, placing them on the counter like trophies and daring her to rename them. But satisfaction is a poor architect. Evidence was the foundation. Rebecca sensed the air changing. She told me my quiet was frightening, that my attention to detail felt like violence. She raised her chorus when I refused to sing. Friends sent me paragraphs about forgiveness, about how all marriages suffer winters, about how men obsessed with odometers drive their wives away. I ignored the choir and made dinner. A week later, another email arrived. A 4th motel night earned. I printed it, compared dates, and saw how neatly her project reviews aligned with her earned stays. It was almost elegant, the geometry of deceit. Almost, but elegance doesn't hold weight. Truth, given time, drags everything to the floor. I stopped thinking of revenge as a spectacle, something that would make people gasp. I began treating it as a door I would close behind me, carrying my children into a calmer house. The folder would speak without my voice. The room with rules would sort the mess. My job was to keep steady. While the network tried to choreograph my collapse, the office was painted in calming neutrals, beige walls pretending to be invisible. Rebecca perched on the couch with her legs crossed, face arranged into careful suffering. When the therapist asked why we had come, she didn't hesitate. "My husband starves me," she said, voice trembling on cue. "Emotionally, intimately. He does chores like a ledger, always keeping score. He stares through me until I feel like a ghost in my own home." Each accusation was sharp, rehearsed, sliding into the room like knives. I sat across from her, silent, letting the air hold their weight. The therapist leaned forward, notebook open, eyebrows patient. His questions were gentle but direct. "Who is Jason? Did the messages escalate? Did meetings occur?" Rebecca shifted into semantics. Yes, there was a Jason, but the character in those messages wasn't really her. Yes, they met up, but only in public, only to talk, only because she felt invisible at home. Every answer was a dodge disguised as confession. When the therapist suggested that responsibility in a marriage is shared, Rebecca bristled. Her shoulders squared, her chin lifted. "You don't understand," she snapped. "This is different." He drove me to it. By the time we reached the parking lot, she was already rewriting the session. "We need a doctor who understands modern marriages," she told me. "Someone who won't blame me for trying to feel alive." 2 days later, she emerged from a clinic waving a memo like a victory flag. "The doctor agrees. I had no choice." When I asked for the document, she sent a bland patient summary, blood pressure, stress levels, nothing about absolution. When I pointed it out, she doubled down. "You don't need to see the exact words, just believe me." I refused. I had decided not to be bullied by paraphrase. At the next counseling session, she unveiled a new strategy. "If porn counts as infidelity," she said, "then he's guilty too, we're even." She delivered it like a lawyer reading closing arguments. The therapist folded his hands. Labels aren't as important as deception, he said carefully. Consent matters. Did he hide his behavior from you? Did you hide yours from him? Rebecca ignored the distinction. She clung to the only fragment that served her. Infidelity can be defined broadly. Later in the car, she turned to me with a triumphant smile. See, we both messed up. That means you forgive me. I watched her transform trained professionals into props for her play. The therapist became her reluctant witness. The doctor, her imagined defense attorney. Even the word infidelity repurposed as camouflage. I stopped hoping for validation in those rooms. Instead, I began using them as notebooks with walls, places to record how far she would stretch to avoid the truth. If the sessions gave me anything, it was clarity. Rebecca wasn't seeking reconciliation. She was seeking acquittal. Driving home, the silence between us was thick. Storefront windows reflected the setting sun, each pane like a door I might walk through. I didn't feel healed. I didn't feel free. But I felt certain. And certainty was the first step toward escape. Rebecca offered the polygraph like a duel. Her eyes glittered as she said it. If you don't believe me, I'll take a test. Hook me up to wires. Let the machine prove I'm telling the truth. She leaned back in her chair, smug as though the wires would become her armor. I said nothing. She mistook my silence for surrender. The first test came back inconclusive. The examiner's voice was professional, neutral. He suggested a free retest, citing nerves, dehydration, or poor sleep. Rebecca returned home, pacing the kitchen, claiming victory anyway. See, it didn't say I lied. But her smile was crooked, and she kept refreshing her phone, waiting for reassurance. That night, I noticed the messages. A colleague, the same one who had rehearsed alibis with her, sent dosage advice for a sedative. Lorazepam settles the nerves, just enough to calm your pulse. Rebecca replied with heart emojis. She believed she had found her cheat code. The next evening, while she showered, I checked her purse. Inside was a prescription bottle, the label scrubbed off with a nail file. I replaced the pills with vitamins of similar size. If she wanted to gamble with chemistry, I would let her do it without the advantage. At the retest, she lobbied the examiner, smiling sweetly as she suggested alternative phrasing. Instead of asking if I had sex, maybe ask if I ever met him in public. That's the truth. I did, but only in public. That way we avoid ambiguity. It was stagecraft, not science, and the examiner, perhaps weary, perhaps cautious, adjusted the wording. Rebecca returned radiant, waving the paper like scripture. I passed with flying colors. Now you owe me an apology. I read the sheet twice. The questions were evasive, the answers even more so. I called the examiner directly. His voice was careful. The subject passed as the questions were worded. That pause was everything. Rebecca didn't care. She poured wine, lifted her glass, toasted her own exoneration. Later, she texted her friends, beat the test, told you. Easy. One replied, you could rob a bank and walk out smiling. The chat filled with laughing emojis, the silent cheer of conspirators. I added the transcript to my growing folder, not the test itself, not the official paper. Those could be dismissed. But the messages afterward, the glee, the self-congratulation, those were better than any polygraph. They revealed intent. They revealed calculation. Watching her preen in the kitchen, glass raised high, I wondered what she saw in herself. Did she believe in her own innocence, or only in her ability to perform it? The polygraph had become her theater, the examiner her stagey hand, the wires her costume jewelry, the audience her friends applauded no matter the script. I stopped arguing about needles. Machines can be tricked. Pills can flatten a pulse. Wording can carve escape hatches into yes and no. But odometers cannot be gamed. Receipts cannot be sedated. Cameras don't lie about light. Truth doesn't need a heartbeat. It leaves footprints. That night, while she slept smugly beside me, I wrote a line at the top of my notes. Some systems produce theater, not truth. Don't fight them on stage, fight them on paper. The next morning, she demanded again, say you're sorry, admit you were wrong. I looked at her across the breakfast table, her eyes bright with false victory, and said only, the test proved one thing, you're good at games. She laughed like she had won. I let her, because silence is stronger than applause. Rebecca thrived on reaction. Every tear, every accusation, every slammed door, she fed on the spark it drew from me. For years, I had supplied it, trying to soothe, trying to argue, trying to fold the chaos back into order. That was the loop, and loops are cages, so I stopped spinning the wheel. My answers shrank to stone. Yes, no, I'll handle it. I refused her circular debates, the ones designed not for resolution but for fuel. I did not rise when she staged collapses in the kitchen. If the children needed lunch, I made it. If bills needed paying, I paid them. If she demanded comfort, I let silence take the place of my voice. Rebecca panicked at the withdrawal. She told friends that my composure was cruelty, that withholding words was a form of abuse. He just sits there like a stone, she texted one confidante. I cry and he stares. It's worse than shouting. She reframed my restraint into aggression. And they believed her, not knowing she was the one who had written the script. When her audience grew tired, she pivoted to the children. At dinner, she wept about losing the family, her voice cracking as she told our eldest that Mommy was trying so hard while Daddy didn't care. An hour later, in the laundry room, she used a coworker's phone to text Jason. Grief on stage, betrayal backstage. I named boundaries and enforced them without spectacle. Do not involve the kids in our arguments. Conversations about Jason are off the table. If you yell, I will leave the room. Each rule was a fence post driven into the ground, not loud, not dramatic, but immovable. She hated it. She wanted storms, not fences. I kept my warmth for the children, pancakes on Saturday mornings, homework checked before bedtime, calm presence when their mother's moods surged like tides. I documented relentlessly, dates, times, quotes, screenshots. Each contradiction she spun became another thread in the rope she was tying for herself. I attended individual counseling, not to fix the marriage, the fantasy was dead, but to harden my plan. My counselor asked me what I wanted. Peace, I said, and proof. Rebecca grew frantic. The less I engaged, the more she spun for two. She accused me of affairs I wasn't having. She told friends I was unstable. She told me my silence was punishment. Yet her stories contradicted themselves. In one version, I was cold and distant. In another, I was jealous and controlling. I saved both. Gray rock is not a mood. It is a method. Under its quiet, the case matured like fruit in a cellar. Each day I said less, and each day she revealed more. By the time she stormed into the bedroom one night demanding that I just admit we're both guilty, I looked at her and said only, "Good night." She slammed the door hard enough to rattle the frame. I wrote the time in my notebook, turned off the light, and slept better than I had in months. Rebecca understood something I had only just begun to see clearly. Stories live longer online than in the rooms where they are born. So she began curating her image. On social media, she wrote like a grieving widow of a marriage I had supposedly murdered with neglect. Sometimes you miss someone you can't talk to anymore, she posted, draping the words in vagueness. Friends rushed to comment with hearts and sympathy. That same day, in a hidden thread, she messaged Jason flirty nostalgia about their high school years. 2 audiences, 2 scripts, 1 actress. At work, she cultivated allies who already distrusted husbands. She joked about me being paranoid, unstable, obsessed with odometers and dishwashers. They laughed, and their laughter became her shield. When she came home, she used their laughter as ammunition. "Even my colleagues think you're unstable," she told me, pausing carefully before the word. Unstable. Dangerous when spoken in the same breath as firearms. But she didn't know I had already removed them. They sat locked in a friend's safe, serial numbers documented, the paper trail clean, so her trap sprung empty. I didn't react. I didn't defend. I let the silence stand. And in that silence, her story grew louder, less careful. I realized I didn't need to match her audience. My audience was smaller but sharper, future readers in a courtroom. Judges don't care about vague posts or sympathetic coworkers. They care about receipts, dates, and distances. While Rebecca stitched her mask, I stitched my file, and then her mask began to slip. One morning she dyed her hair for me, though she hadn't looked at me with affection in months. Jason was off work that day. I knew his schedule better than she thought. At lunch, she claimed she needed a nap. The car's mileage disagreed. Her choreography became predictable. A long shower the night before, a sudden nap at noon, bursts of energy in the evening. She thought she was improvising. She was repeating. She wanted to control the story, to paint herself as the starved wife who strayed only because she was unloved. She wanted sympathy, not truth. I didn't need to stop her. I only needed to keep recording. Paper has no bias, no pity, no appetite for drama. Paper waits. The more she sharpened her knives in gossip, the more her private mask frayed. She wanted me to rage, to shout, to prove her story right. Instead, I wrote the date, the time, the distance. The next week, she posted another vague lament. The worst loneliness is being unseen by the one who promised to see you forever. Her friends applauded her bravery. Jason sent her a photo of his truck. I saved both side by side in the folder with the dull name. She was performing. I was documenting. One day the curtain would fall. The discovery wasn't digital this time. Not a screenshot, not a receipt, not a location ping. It was ink on paper, the old-fashioned kind of confession people forget can betray them more than any phone. On her nightstand sat a spiral notebook, the cover bent from being shoved under pillows and pulled back out. I hadn't gone searching for it. I was looking for a pen, and when the notebook slid across the wood, it fell open to a page already waiting. 2 columns, my name on the left, Jason's on the right. The handwriting was neat, almost adolescent in its roundness. Under my name, safe, steady, dependable, good father, stable income someday. Under Jason's, manly job, intense sex, passionate, spontaneous, makes me feel alive. It was arithmetic written in ink, childish in its simplicity, but the sum was undeniable. Our marriage reduced to a ledger. I was the fallback stock, safe, boring, reliable. Jason was the risk, the quick profit, the volatility she mistook for passion. For a moment, my stomach dropped, the way it does when an elevator jerks before settling. My hands went cold, the words blurred, but then something steadied inside me. The math was juvenile, but the conclusion was adult. If Jason ever offered her more than a bed, she would leave. I hadn't lost to love. I had been demoted to second best, a placeholder until something shinier stuck. I didn't rage. I didn't wake her. I didn't rip the page out and wave it like a flag. Instead, I pulled my phone from my pocket and photographed every line. The click of the shutter sounded like a gavel. Evidence collected, file updated. I closed the notebook softly and slid it back beneath the pillow, almost tender, like returning a diary to a child who doesn't yet realize how transparent she is. Then I left the room. That night I drove for hours. The roads stretched empty, yellow lines dissolving into thought. I asked myself what could be salvaged and what would have to burn. The house. Maybe the routines, unlikely. The children, absolutely. They were not hers to weaponize, not mine to abandon. The drive gave me clarity. Negotiation was over. You cannot bargain with someone waiting for a better bid. You cannot fix a home already listed for sale in her imagination. I had been debating how much to forgive, how much to rebuild. The notebook answered, none. When I returned, the house was quiet. Rebecca slept curled on her side, her face softened by dreams, as if innocence could be rehearsed even in sleep. I stood in the doorway longer than I should have, looking at her the way one looks at a painting that once meant something, but now only reminds you of who you used to be. I turned away and wrote a single line in my own notebook. I am not second best. The next morning she hummed while pouring coffee, light on her feet, unaware that her private ledger had already changed the course of mine. She kissed the top of my head as if routine could still disguise contempt. I let her. Silence has teeth, sharper than confrontation. What she didn't understand was that her notebook had ended any chance of negotiation. She had put her own handwriting on the wall, and I had filed it away. Second best is not a role a man survives in for long, and I had no intention of dying in place. The betrayal that followed didn't hide in notebooks or text threads. It arrived in plain sight. One afternoon, as I gathered paperwork from the printer tray, I found it, folded between other documents, waiting as though it wanted to be discovered. A letter. Rebecca's voice poured across the page, aching for spotlight. You make me feel alive. You are the only one who sees me. Daniel never looks at me anymore. He's a shadow in my house. And you are the flame I've been waiting for. If only we could turn this into a real story. Paragraph after paragraph, she wrote in metaphors of fire and drowning. Jason wasn't just her lover, he was her rescuer, her imagined deliverer. My name appeared only as contrast, a gray wall against his bright graffiti. Reading it, the hollow in my chest returned. But when Jason's reply appeared, captured by the same careless backup system, the hollow shifted. His answer was blunt, unromantic. This is too messy, I'm out, I wouldn't want this done to me. Her grand script had met the blunt edge of reality. Of course, she tried to spin it differently for me. That evening, she mentioned the letter herself almost casually. She claimed it was about procedures. Jason had been through divorce before, she said, and she was simply asking how filings worked. She spoke with a straight face, as if the word flame belonged in legal paperwork. I asked for a copy. The next morning, she emailed me a PDF. A sanitized version, clean, polite, stripped of passion. Metadata revealed the truth. It had been created that very morning, not last week. A forgery disguised as clarification. She had rewritten her desperation into bureaucratic curiosity. I saved both versions, the original letter filled with longing and the sanitized replica. They sat side by side in my folder like twin masks, one she wore in secret, the other she performed for me. And for the first time since the printer hissed in Act 2, I felt something close to relief. Not joy, not triumph, but clarity, because now the contrast was undeniable. Even she couldn't spin both versions forever. It is easier to leave a house when the person inside insists the flames are just candlelight. I closed the file, backed it up twice, and sat in the kitchen stillness. The relief I felt wasn't about her betrayal, it was about proof. Every performance now came with its backstage notes. Every mask she wore came with its discarded twin. She still believed she controlled the story. I knew better. Stories don't end when the actor stops talking. Stories end when the audience walks away. When the letter lost its power, Rebecca reached for the only weapon she knew I would never ignore, the children. She began softly testing the waters. At dinner, she wept about broken homes, her voice trembling just enough to draw wide eyes from our oldest. Mommy is trying to hold the family together, she said, but Daddy just doesn't care anymore. Our son stared at his plate, chewing in silence, and I felt a different kind of rage spread through me. Not the rage that explodes, the rage that takes notes. A week later, she sharpened the angle. He's acting out because of you, she told me, gesturing toward our teenager after a mild outburst. He can feel your coldness, your silence is damaging him. That night I logged the words in my notebook, exact phrasing, exact time. The hints escalated. One night, whispered in the dark, she leaned close and said, "You know the courts will side with me. You barely make anything. They'll see my income, your instability. They'll see your PTSD." PTSD. The word hit like a slap. I had never been diagnosed. I had never even claimed it from my military years. But in her mouth, it became a prophecy, fiction rehearsed for future use. I didn't argue. I wrote it down. What she didn't know was that my documentation had already expanded. Every morning I photographed lunches I packed, backpacks I checked, homework I signed. I saved texts where she withheld her schedule, showing how often I was the one juggling rides, meals, and bedtimes. I stopped repairing her car after I discovered she drove it from my break job straight to Jason's dinner table. That car was no longer my responsibility. Neither was her image of me as the handyman husband who quietly fixed what she broke while she slipped away. I met with Attorney Carter again. He scanned my folder, heavier now, and nodded. "Good," he said. "Patterns matter more than moments. Don't chase humiliation, build terms." He explained how custody judges look not at spectacle but at stability, who documents, who provides, who keeps the calendar intact. Revenge, in his view, wasn't about spectacle. It was about ensuring the children were shielded while the liar collapsed under her own inconsistencies. Rebecca mistook my restraint for weakness. She believed the children were currency, chips she could slide across the table to force my hand. But each time she invoked them, Each time she whispered threats about custody or rehearsed diagnoses, she only handed me another entry for the record. The revenge I once imagined, her public humiliation, her collapse before an audience, was fading. In its place grew something quieter, harder, not the kind that leaves applause, but the kind that leaves signatures. Terms written in ink, orders signed by a court, walls she could not scale with crocodile tears. One evening she pressed our youngest into my lap and said, "If you leave me, you're leaving them too." I kissed the child's hair, tucked him into bed, and when I returned, I wrote the sentence down word for word, not because I needed to remember, but because one day a judge might need to see it. She was trying to turn my children into pawns, but pawns, moved carefully enough, can reach the other side of the board. Some truths don't arrive with shouts. They slip in quietly, like a draft under a door, carrying a chill you can't ignore. That morning, before leaving for work, I reset the trip meter in Rebecca's car. A small act, almost invisible, but I had learned that small numbers tell big stories. The needle fell back to 0. I snapped a photo, timestamp glowing in digital amber. At noon, she texted, going to nap, exhausted. I sent back nothing but a thumbs up. She believed silence meant compliance. When I came home later, her appearance told a different story. She was freshly made up, wearing a low-cut top she never wore for me. By pickup time for the kids, she had changed again, back into something plain, neutral, unremarkable. Theater requires costume changes. Marriage requires none. The trip meter read 5 kilometers, enough for a detour, enough for truth. I mapped the distance in my head, then checked the file of her patterns. Jason's house stood just under 3 kilometers away. I didn't need imagination, I needed verification. A street camera 2 blocks from his house provided it, grainy footage placing her car exactly where silence insisted she had been. But it was the neighbor's doorbell cam that ended doubt. He was an old man, quiet, grateful since I had helped set up his Wi-Fi months earlier. When I asked, gently, if I might review his footage from that afternoon, he nodded. Together we watched Rebecca on the tiny screen, holding 2 paper cups of tea, shifting her weight like a teenager on a doorstep. Jason opened the door. She stepped inside. 90 minutes later, she left alone, empty-handed. No confrontation, no screaming, just quiet proof. I thanked the neighbor, downloaded the clip, and backed it up twice before I drove home. That evening, Rebecca tried to close the gap in the kitchen. She brushed my arm, voice lowered into softness that once fooled me. "We could try tonight," she murmured, meaning sex, meaning reconciliation through performance. I looked at her, at the woman who had worn one shirt for Jason and another for the children, and said simply, "Not tonight. No accusation, no lecture, just refusal." I slept in the guest room. For the first time, the sheets didn't feel cold. They felt clean. In the morning, Rebecca pouted at my absence from her bed, spinning silence into fresh grievance. I poured coffee, packed lunches, let her words dissolve into the air. Every sentence was another performance. I no longer bought tickets. Proof had arrived, quiet but undeniable. Not the kind that begged for belief, the kind that carried itself. Leaving doesn't always begin with suitcases by the door. Sometimes it begins with subtraction. I started with the documents, birth certificates, social security cards, insurance policies, all scanned, copied, stored in a folder at Mark's apartment. Next, the finances, joint accounts mirrored into a private one, mail redirected to a P.O. box, bills placed on auto pay, starving any excuse of chaos. Then the house. Anything that could be twisted into a story about my temper disappeared. Tools packed away, valuables locked. The kitchen stripped of sharp edges she might someday claim were aimed at her. It was a quiet move out, conducted inside the same walls. I packed a go bag, nothing dramatic, a week's worth of clothes, toiletries, the laptop with the folder backed up 3 times. I left it at Mark's, ready for the day when subtraction would become absence. Then I turned inward. No more explanations, no more reactions. Rebecca thrived on drama. It was her currency, her addiction. For years, every time she threw a match, I supplied the oxygen, so I stopped breathing with her. For 72 hours, I spoke only what the children required. "Breakfast is ready." shoes by the door, homework in the bag, logistics, nothing more. Rebecca pinged against the silence like a trapped bird, her moods ricocheting from rage to syrup. 1 hour she spat accusations, "You're cruel, you're punishing me with quiet." The next she turned sweet, "We can fix this. I love you, remember our wedding. I didn't fight, I didn't melt, I let each wave break against the rock and retreat." She tried to bait me with sighs, slammed doors, half-truths designed to pull me back into orbit. But without an audience, her script collapsed. Ghosting was not punishment, it was the removal of her stage. The children noticed the difference. They asked fewer questions, laughed louder at the table, filled the silence with stories about school. Rebecca's control evaporated. Her monologues bounced off the walls instead of sinking hooks into me. By the third day, she looked at me with a kind of fear, not fear of violence, but fear of invisibility. She had lived so long drawing energy from my reactions that the vacuum now felt like suffocation. I slept in the guest room again. For the first time, the house felt like mine, not because I had reclaimed it, but because I had stopped lending it to her performance. Ghosting isn't the absence of love, it's the absence of participation in a lie. And in that silence, the future finally began to take shape. Attorney Carter filed the paperwork on a Tuesday morning. By noon, a process server walked into Rebecca's office, an unremarkable man in a gray suit carrying an unremarkable envelope. He called her name, verified her identity, placed the papers in her hands. No drama, no warning, no stage lights, just a signature, sealed fate folded into paper. Rebecca had dressed carefully that day, preparing to play the role of the wronged wife at lunch with colleagues who fed on gossip. Instead, she sat at her desk staring at the envelope, the weight of it heavier than any accusation I could have thrown. At nearly the same moment, her parents and sister received an email from me. Calm, factual, a few short paragraphs. A separation is underway. Reconciliation has failed. I ask that you support Rebecca and the children through what comes next. I am grateful for the kindness you've shown me over the years. Please know I tried. She continued. That is all that matters now. No screenshots, no evidence dump, no spectacle, just the truth pared down to what could not be spun. The contrast cut deeper than shouting ever could. Rebecca had expected a blow-up she could narrate against me, shouting, her crying, an audience sympathizing. Instead, the papers and the note arrived like snow, quiet, undeniable, covering everything. Of course, she blustered. She called her father, who armed her with myths from his own divorce in 1979. You'll get the house, you'll get the kids, he'll walk away with nothing. She repeated his words like incantations, trying to conjure victory from another century. But Carter's plan was built on modern ground. The paperwork did not care about myth. It cared about dates, assets, custody standards. It cared about the children's best interests, not her father's nostalgia. She could rage about instability, about income, about imagined diagnoses. The file showed stability, receipts, steady care. Carter reminded me separation agreements reduce collateral damage, and for now that mattered more than vengeance. Keep it clean, he said. You want custody, not chaos. I agreed. Revenge had already shifted shape long ago. It wasn't spectacle anymore. It was walking away with what mattered intact. Rebecca paced our kitchen that night, papers spread across the counter. She demanded to know how I could do this without warning, without discussion. We could have worked on it, she insisted, but her words sounded like lines even she didn't believe anymore. I answered only once. We did work on it, you just worked somewhere else. She slammed a fist on the table, furious at the silence she couldn't break. I gathered the children's lunches for the next day, letting her rage echo through the walls. Paper was louder than her voice now. That night I slept in the guest room again. The house pulsed with her anger, but for me there was stillness. Served cold. That was how justice arrived. Months later the house was smaller but calmer. The echoes of slammed doors had been replaced by ordinary sounds, dishes clattering, backpacks shuffling, the quiet hum of lamps at bedtime. Co-parenting was still a maze, but the dead ends were fewer. The children adjusted to 2 homes, 2 routines, 2 sets of holidays. Their laughter grew louder now, no longer competing with tension at the table. I learned to fill silence differently. Instead of scrolling through late-night despair, I wrote in a journal. Some pages were only a single sentence. Today I made it through without thinking of her. Others stretched into paragraphs about the future, not the past. Cooking became therapy, pasta with too much garlic, pancakes that never came out the same twice. I replaced the spider plant that had withered during the worst of it. On the windowsill, the new one thrived, a small defiance against decay. Therapy gave me a language I hadn't had before. Words like gaslighting, boundaries, projection, terms that made sense of the chaos I had endured. My therapist sketched a blueprint for what I wanted next. Honesty that didn't need an audience, love that didn't demand performance. The plan wasn't about chasing happiness. It was about refusing lies. Rebecca still sent messages heavy with revisionism. We both made mistakes. You abandoned me first. I answered only the parts that concerned the children, pickup times, dentist appointments, school forms. She tried to bait me back into old arguments. I declined the invitation every time. Silence was my reply. Jason faded into rumor. Friends mentioned him in passing, another story swallowed by the town's endless appetite for gossip. He was no longer my rival, just a footnote. I didn't call this a happy ending. I didn't believe in that phrase anymore. What I had now was something better, a truthful beginning. The revenge I once imagined, her collapse, her humiliation, proved unnecessary. What mattered was documentation, boundaries, absence. Those had been the tools that built my escape. One evening after the kids were asleep, I sat by the window with a cup of tea. The street outside was quiet, the kind of quiet that once felt suffocating. Now it felt like proof that a life can be rebuilt, not with fire, but with paper, with patience, with the simple decision to walk away. The silence was no longer hers, it was mine. And so the story of I ghosted my cheating wife and made her lies collapse comes to an end. What began with whispers in the dark ended with silence reclaimed, not as weakness, but as strength. Betrayal always has a price, and in this case, the price was watching her own lies collapse without a single word shouted. But here's the question for you. If you were in his shoes, would you fight fire with fire, or would you walk away with silence as your weapon? Share your thoughts in the comments below. I'd love to hear your perspective. If this story moved you, don't forget to like, subscribe, and join us here on Cheating Stories 7 for more tales of betrayal, revenge, and the lessons hidden inside them. Until next time, thank you for watching.